as he can. I am Molly. Pardon? Did somebody say something or no? Okay. I'm Molly Cummings. I'm the Vice Chair of the Metropolitan Council, and this is the Committee of the Whole meeting, July 7th, 2021. I don't have the script, so I'm going to wing it and do it from memory. We are meeting remotely, which doesn't allow for a lot of participation, but if you are wanting to participate, comment, ask questions, and so forth, please send those comments in and we will respond as soon as we are able. Hold on here and I will get the address. All right. I won't get the address right now. Continuing, I think we'll continue on and let's begin and make sure that we have a quorum by taking attendance. So I'm not sure if it is, who is here today taking the minutes. Is that you, Liz? Are you here?
It's Bridget today.
Bridget, hello, Bridget. Could you take attendance, please? Call the roll.
Yes, Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson. Atlas Ingebretson. Barber. Barber. Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Ferguson.
Here.
Fredson.
Here.
Gonzalez. Gonzalez. Johnson. Johnson. Lee.
Here.
Johnson's here. Sorry, I was muted.
Lilligren.
Here.
Lindstrom.
Here.
Muse.
Here.
Sterner.
Present.
Vento.
Present.
Zarin. Zarin. Oh. And Chair Zelli.
You forgot Wolf.
You did.
I did forget Wolf. Wolf.
I'm here.
Great, we have a
All
quorum.
right.
Thanks, Bridget. And Charlie will be joining us as soon as he can. And I do have the address currently. So if there are members of the public who have a question, you can send it, or a comment, you can send it to public.info@metc.state.mn.us for questions and comments. We will get back to you as soon as we can. Again, it's public.info@metc.state.mn.us, and that's for questions or comments. And the reason we are continuing to meet remotely is the Metropolitan Council Chair has determined that it is not practical or prudent to conduct in-person meetings in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 130.021. And we look forward to your participation as you are able, and your questions we will get back to as soon as we can. The next step in our meeting would be the approval of the agenda, unless there are, and it is an amended agenda. So unless there are questions, comments, or changes, we can assume that the agenda as presented is acceptable. Are there any questions or changes? Seeing none, we'll move along. So our first item of business is approval of the minutes. It would be the minutes of June 16, 2021, the regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole. Bridget, could you call the roll?
That's Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson. Atlas Ingebretson. Barber. Barber. Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Fredson. Gonzalez,
Fredson is an aye.
Gonzalez, Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musse,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zarin,
Aye. Aye.
Terzeli.
And I neglected to get a motion and a second on that. So should we flip it around and do it backwards? Everyone has said aye, but does someone want to formally make a motion and someone want to second it so that we have this done properly?
Johnson
I'll make-
moves.
Lindgren moved.
I'll second.
Very good. And we've taken the roll, so that is passed. Thanks, Bridget. Thanks for bearing with me. I appreciate that. Moving on to our information, our first information item is the 2021 legislative session review, which we all look forward to at the end of the session. So Judd Shetman is going to do that for us. And Judd, thank you for all of your work during the session. I know it's an exhausting time of the year for you, and then especially when it gets extended, and you work so hard on behalf of the council. We appreciate it. We're looking forward to hear the review. So I see you have a slide presentation up, and I will hand it over to you.
Well, great, and thank you, Madam Chair and members. I am happy to report that the legislative special session is over as well, and so that completed earlier today. But I'll wrap that up here at the end of the presentation here. But Greg, you want to go to the next slide? So, sorry, I just have to get. There we go. So just a little background here that going back to the 2021 legislative session, that this last session was held almost entirely remotely with no access to the Capitol during the regular session, which is very, very difficult to do, especially when we're putting together the state's budget. However, it is a budget year, and the Constitution requires that the legislature and the governor are required to enact a budget for the state fiscal years 22 and 23. And there were major swings in financial forecasting, and the infusion of federal funds also complicated the budget process, but it also helped the budget process as well. But just for some context, folks may recall that we went from a forecasted $1.3 billion deficit to a $1.6 billion surplus over the course of this session. And then we also received the CRISA funds and the American Rescue Plan funds during that time as well. So there were all kinds of things moving and changing during this last session, but and it just made it more difficult when we were away from the Capitol. But as you're going to hear, we were able to address that. So Greg, you want to go to the next slide? So the legislative leaders agreed to a broad outline of the budget bill in the last day of the regular session, which was May 17th. And so in that, they all agreed to targets, and the biggest target for us was the transportation bill, which was a $200 million general fund target, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the conference committees that were established prior to the regular legislative session adjourning or completing on May 17th, they went away, and then it turned into working groups that were tasked with negotiating the details, and leadership engaged to settle those outstanding issues. But one thing that was, I'm not sure everyone is aware of, is during the working groups, the conversations were basically held between the House and the Senate, and the Senate did not want the administration participating in those discussions. And so Chair Zelli, Regional Administrator Bogie, and we were at the Capitol, ready and prepared to help, but we never actually had one-on-one conversations with the Senate. That was really done between Chair Hornstein and Chair Newman, and Chair Hornstein did a great job of helping represent the administration's positions as part of those conversations. And there was a special session that was called then to begin passing those budget bills. That began on June 14th, and the negotiations were continuous right up into the final bill passing late last week. And so the good news is that we did not run into a legislative shutdown, but we did just run right up until the very last minute. The good news is that the transportation bill was signed about a week prior to that, which was great. But let's go to the next slide here. But the legislature, the council has a broad spectrum of issues that we participate with at the legislature, but the biggest issue that we spend most of our time is to land a biennial budget from the state related to metropolitan area transit, metro transit, metro mobility, and the agreement that we landed on includes two big items. The first is that we were able to continue the base level general fund appropriations for our transit system and metro mobility. That means that we were able to continue our base operations of $55 million roughly a year for metro mobility. We received just shy of $33 million a year for our light rail operations and North Star operations. And then we fund the rest of our system basically off of the motor vehicle sales tax. Also included in that agreement was a $250,000 one-time appropriation for the analysis of transit service improvements in the Highway 55 corridor from Medina to downtown Minneapolis. Councilmember Johnson is familiar with this. We spent some time talking with her and Representative Cleavehorn and also Hennepin County regarding this potential study. I will add that this appropriation requires a matching amount of $250,000 in order for this study to be done. And the idea, I believe, is that Hennepin County would be providing that match. The next slide, please. Here is a really big outcome for us in the transportation agreement. There was $57.5 million in one-time appropriations for arterial bus rapid transit projects in the region. This comes on the heels of us receiving funding for both the D line and the B line last October. And so we are able to really accelerate our investment in arterial bus rapid transit. Representative Hornstein receives a lot of credit for pressing this as well. And the Senate has much more of an open mind when it comes to talking about transit investments when we're talking about arterial BRT. And so this is a significant amount of money, again, that will allow us to advance and hopefully complete the E line and put significant resources toward the F line. There is the possibility that we may receive some additional federal monies as well that may help us move these projects along, particularly the F line a bit further, but we need to see where all of that shakes out. But it is without a doubt a major investment in arterial BRT that we're able to really press forward with, and we will continue to do that. Next year is typically a bonding year at the legislature, and I expect that we will continue to request funds in order to keep investing in that service. The next item here that we were able to secure were our regional transit capital bonding authorities. As you'll see, we were able to secure just shy of $100 million for our regional transit capital funds. That is the funds that we use to provide our 20% local match for federal matching dollars to replace our fleet. We also use it for other small transit capital purposes. This helps support the opt-out providers. It supports the Metro Mobility, our Dial-A-Ride, and of course, Metro Transit bus and rail as well. I will add that there needs to be a little asterisk attached to this, where the Senate wanted to make sure that these dollars weren't going to be used in order to build or construct a new or expand a current light rail line. So there is a prohibition for us to not be able to use those to build a future or current light rail line that's under construction. We wouldn't do that anyway. This is similar language that we've had to agree to in the past, but it's just there for comfort language for the Senate. But the fact of the matter is it's inconsequential that way. But the good news is that we were able to secure these because they were hanging in the balance for a little bit. And and there were issues with trying to figure out how to spend the target dollars, and these dollars in particular have a general fund impact that we need to spend a little time with the leaders on in order to be able to make sure that these landed safely, and I'm happy to report that they did. We can go to the next slide. So I did talk to some council members about this a couple weeks ago when we got together at the chair's house, but this particular item is probably the single largest victory that we've been able to achieve in transportation and metro mobility in particular. 2 years ago, council members may remember that we were able to separate metro mobility onto its own appropriation line, so that it wasn't going to, that since the growing cost of metro mobility, what happens is that if there weren't enough dollars provided, that those dollars would come out of the rest of our transit budget, so we were able to separate those all together. This last session, based on a lot of work from a lot of people, and I will give some credit to the work of the governor's Blue Ribbon Commission on the Metropolitan Council. One of the recommendations that they made was to forecast metro mobility, and we were able to not only achieve this, but it was also included in both the House position and the Senate position, and this establishes metro mobility as a forecasted program beginning in state fiscal year 2026. So beginning in that biennium, it'll be for fiscal years 26 and 27. And in the meantime, we will be able to use federal dollars in order to cover those deficits. But this, making this a forecasted program means that future state forecasts are going to incorporate the obligations from the general fund for the cost of metro mobility. So when you hear that the state has a budget surplus of so much or a budget deficit of so much, they have already accounted for making sure that the funding of metro mobility is funded. And this is good news because metro mobility is a mandated program at the state and at the federal level, and it also significantly reduces our structural deficit. We still have a significant structural deficit, but just keep in mind that in fiscal years 26 and 27, we estimate that what we would need from the legislature in additional money to just fund metro mobility would probably be in the $115 to $125 million range. And so we were able to land that, and the state is now accounting for that in its overall budget. And so this is a massive victory for us, and we there are a lot of people to thank, and I think that this in particular was a win-win-win for the Met Council, for the House of Representatives, and also for the Senate, that we could all agree that this was a great approach to making sure that this service is now taken care of once and for all. The next bullet point is that we agreed to a zero emission transit vehicle transition plan that will be developed and maintained and revised every 5 years. We received a $250,000 appropriation for this. This was a initiative led by Chair Hornstein, and this is work that folds into what we're trying to do with our work on e-buses and making sure that we have a plan, and this will certainly help us with that. Next slide, please. Okay, so here the council has to submit a report to the legislature each year with the projected total operating expenses and reserve fund balances. This really isn't new. We do this as part of the Legislative Commission on Metropolitan Governance that Regional Administrator Bogie and I have been providing to the Legislative Commission for many, many years. I guess the new piece is that the replacement service providers or the opt-outs are now required to report their operating expenses and reserve fund balances as well. That was not something that was included previously, and this is new requirements that will then go not just to the Legislative Commission but to the committees. And it also asks that the replacement service providers have to submit to the legislature a detailing of the expenditures for their federal funds that they received through the council. So it would be their CARES funds and their CRISA funds. Lastly here, the city of Minneapolis was authorized to finance streetcar projects through a value capture district and it was amended to apply to transit lines. And so this was something that Representative Jordan brought forward and was included in the final bill. Let's look at the next slide, please. The Center for Transportation Studies is going to be doing a study of the post-pandemic impacts of transit, and they were wanting to have it focus primarily on the metro area and have a specific review of the North Star commuter rail and commuter-oriented transit services, since those were the types of services that were hit the most during the pandemic. And I know that's no surprise to this group. And the report has to be completed by February of 2023. And MnDOT will be contracting for this study, but we will be working very, very closely with them on that. The next slide. But what was not included in the bill, and unfortunately, and I think folks are aware of this now, that we were not able to establish or have the legislature, particularly the Senate, agree to our initiative to establish a administrative citations program. In particular, we needed the legislature's help to do two things. Number one, to reduce the penalty from a misdemeanor to an administrative citation, and then to also allow someone other than a sworn police officer to write a ticket. And I know Regional Administrator Bogie and myself and Chair Zelli spent a lot of time over the course of the last month as we were trying to land this. We were thinking and were hopeful that we were going to be able to get this agreed to, but in the end, there was reluctance on the Senate, and they chose to say that they're going to save that conversation for another day. There were broader conversations related to safety, public safety type things that this may have been rolled up into, but you know, we're still committed to transit safety, and we'll see what we can do in the meantime. But I can assure you that we'll continue to keep working with the legislature, and particularly the Senate, to make sure that we can hopefully take another look at this next year. Also, that what wasn't included in the bill was the House position that would have created a metro area sales tax in the metro area, and also require the deployment of transit vehicles according to air quality data provided by the MPCA. And can we go to the next slide, please? Also, what was not included in the Senate transportation proposal, or excuse me, in the bill, in the final bill, were a few proposals from the Senate that would have been extremely difficult for us to operate under. The first, which probably the largest, is there was the Senate bill included a position to reduce our general fund operations to $5,000 per year for metro mobility and transit operations. And keep in mind that I said earlier that we get roughly $89 million a year. This reduced our total down to $10,000 from that $89 million. And so that obviously did not happen. There was a requirement that the council had to use federal funds in a specific order. Our federal funds come to us as a direct recipient. And so this couldn't really happen anyway, because these aren't funds that can be appropriated by the legislature, but there was once upon a time language that would have attempted to do that. There was also language in the Senate bill that would have made the transit the last priority use for MinPass revenues, and the way that we looked at it through our fiscal note, it appeared that we would have lost all of those revenues altogether, and I'm happy to report that that didn't happen. There was a prohibition on the use of funds from a local government unit to pay for costs of operations or maintenance on certain busways. In particular, this really applied to the Orange Line, and there was an attempt to have the local governments not have to pay their previously agreed to share of those operations, and that did not happen either. There was a requirement for the council to have to distribute the COVID-19 funds to opt-out providers according to a formula. That language did not happen either. As I mentioned earlier, they received the CARES funds and they also received the CRISA funds. And we have stated to the chairs of the House and Senate committee that we are looking at the American Rescue Plans and using those obviously to replace our deficits, but also we will be distributing them on a demonstrated need basis, and they were okay with that. Also, what did not happen, I know folks have spent a lot of time listening to this particular issue, but there was a requirement to have the council request approval from the FTA to discontinue the operations of the North Star commuter rail line. That did not happen. However, it goes back to that study that we talked about with the Center for Transportation Services that's going to take a look at the kind of post-pandemic impacts of transit on our commuter type services, and obviously North Star will be part of that. And then it also the final bill did not include the host counties to pay for the planning, operating, and capital maintenance of guideways. Our council members will remember that this is something that we had talked about earlier this session. We walked that back and then ultimately said that we would just continue having conversations related on this issue with our county partners. And the Senate, however, kept our original language in their bill, but I can report that that language did not land, and that we will continue having these conversations as we think is a better, more appropriate way to have those conversations, and so that did not happen. Let's go to the next slide. Greg, can we go to the next slide? Okay, before we walk away from transportation, obviously there was a lot going on in that transportation bill from very different perspectives. And so I thought it was important just to make sure that we had a conversation a little bit about not just what was in the final bill, but what was not in that bill. So hopefully that helps add some context to folks. Related to our regional park system, the legacy bill included the continuation of the 40-40-20 split for regional parks, state parks, and greater Minnesota parks and trails. And that means that we'll be getting just under $22 million in fiscal year 22 and just over $22 million in fiscal year 23 for those parks. The omnibus environment bill included just a hair shy of $10 million a year for parks operations and maintenance that will be distributed to the 10 implementing agencies. And then just over $2.5 million from the general fund and just under $7.5 million from the natural resources fund to the implementing agencies. And this is an increase of $850,000 a year from the natural resources fund. So that is very good news. Next slide, please. Also continue on the environment bill is that the incorporated appropriations from the LCCMR and the Environment and Natural Resources Trust fund bills. We had $1 million for regional parks land acquisition for 2021, and for 2022, it was $2.25 million for regional parks land acquisition. So that was great. Next slide, please. So as I did with the transportation bill, I wanted to make sure folks knew what was not included in that bill. And folks will recall that we had an initiative that would allow us to change a minor, some minor language in statute that currently allows cities to establish an influent infiltration program to address private property mitigation. We had that bill heard in the Senate, and we had it heard in the House, and it passed unanimously in both bodies to the House and Senate floors. However, it stalled there, and the House put this particular language in the state government finance bill. So we were very hopeful that in the end that we would be able to get this secured in the state government finance bill. However, the Senate opposed having any local government provisions included in the state government finance bill at all. So there's actually no local government article in the state government finance bill. And so unfortunately, our plan here was set aside. Now, I fully expect that we will be back next year to get this done. And I can tell you that there was literally no opposition to this until we got to the conference committee process, and it got rolled up into a much bigger position than this specific item. And then on the Clean Water Fund appropriations in the legacy bill, these did happen. We did receive $919,000 each year for our metro area water supply sustainability support, and also $625,000 each year for our water demand reduction grant program. So this is great news. It's an increase for our folks in our Metropolitan Council Environmental Services who do this work. So we're very, very happy to see that. Next slide, please. Okay, so I tried to pack a whole lot into those 14 slides or so, but I am happy to take any questions people have. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I recognize Brooke Bordson, who works with me. Brooke is currently on vacation, but I want to make sure that the council members and the chair and regional administrator are aware, which I know they are, that Brooke is a major part of the success of the government affairs team, as well as all of the different staff from the different divisions who I rely on, who Brooke relies on in order to help us at the legislature. It is a major team effort. And I also want to make sure I thank Chair Zelli and Regional Administrator Bogie for all of their help and assistance, because there's a lot going on all of the time. And I call Charlie constantly, I text Mary constantly, and they always pick up. And so it's great and very much appreciated. And so with that, I'm going to stop and take any questions that you might have.
I see Chair Zelli is joining us, but I want to make a couple of comments and a question also first. But Judd, first of all, thank you and your entire team, and certainly the chair and the regional administrator. This is extraordinarily good news, especially coming out of the darkness of COVID-19 and the challenges that we've had and the challenges that we knew we were going to face going forward. So, but I think it's really a reflection, particularly given that you were not in the same room, you were doing things remotely and so forth, of years and years of developing the relationships that you need to develop so that people trust you. We have trust, and there are conversations that are ongoing that ultimately get us these many successes. So that doesn't just happen. And this is just wonderful news on so many fronts. I think that's terrific. I have one question. Can we go to, there are lots of questions, I see that. Can we go to slide 7 for a second, Greg? Or maybe there we go. I'm wondering, Judd, can you speak to the last one, City of Minneapolis authorization to finance streetcar projects through a value capture district amended to apply to, what does that mean exactly to transit lines?
Madam Chair and council members, I think what this means, and I am not an expert on this, so of all of the things that I was prepared to give you a great answer on, this is the one item that I don't have that. But how I understand this is that this incorporates a streetcar project into a definition of a transit line that allows the city of Minneapolis now to focus this value capture district to really incorporate more than what it could before, which previously my understanding is that a streetcar could not be included as part of the definition of a transit line, and now it is. And so this just opens the door to allow the city of Minneapolis to pursue that streetcar project with the with value capture, where without that change, they wouldn't be able to have done that. So it just opens a door of financing for a streetcar project that wasn't there before.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Chair Zelli, would you like to take over? Or are you?
I'm still having can people hear me? Because I'm having this, oh, you can, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you, Molly, and I'm so sorry I've had technology issues, but I'm very familiar with a lot of what Judd described, and it is really pretty amazing that we were able to accomplish what we did, given all the challenges we had starting the legislative session. So hats off to Judd and his team and everybody who was involved. We have a big agenda today, so I don't want to give this a short shrift, but are there any specific questions for Judd at this moment? All right, Judd, thank you, and congratulations again. I think just the AVRT and the forecasting of metro mobility. I mean, those two things alone, I think, are just worth popping the champagne cork for. And we can't underestimate the structural deficit that we know this transit is facing. To have metro mobility as a forecasted item really help close that gap substantially. So I think it was really amazing given all the pressures we've had in so many different fronts. But I want to kind of pivot to, again, I'm sorry my technology is so bad, and thank you, Molly, for just jumping in. We want to get to our Metro Transit Police Department policy overview, and most importantly, to kind of set up this conversation. I believe we have Chief Eddie Frizzell, and maybe a few others that are joining the chief. But first off, just to give us a little bit of context, we've been having the Citizens League do this kind of very kind of extensive public engagement, stakeholder focus group understanding to kind of help inform how we view transit safety, to help think about our policies more broadly. And they're going to be wrapping that up soon and giving us a full, presentation in August. But before we do that, and while we're doing that, we're going to be able to kind of have a deeper kind of understanding about a number of our police policies, practices, and relationships. And I think really today is not the time where we're going to be able to cover it all. It's really just the beginning. So if you think about this police policies that we're going to be looking at today, and particularly what some council members have expressed to us, a real interest in the use of force. So we're going to go deeply into kind of where we are now with use of force. So we're going to get into the weeds pretty quickly. But when we kind of think back that over the next, say, half year into the next year, we really want to spend some time at committee of the whole discussions, kind of going into different topic areas. So we really have a chance to kind of fully understand that and to really kind of help shape some of the strategies that we think some of these police policies, practices, relationships should have. So I've asked council member to actually chair a small work group. We're having these study work groups, and they've come with some success. A small group to help kind of set up the agenda for some of these council, this committee of the whole conversation, and maybe make some recommendations for how we approach a number of areas. And let me just name off what those areas are after hearing really from all of you. Use of force, which we're going to hear about today. Code of conduct enforcement, interaction with youth, the Metro Transit Police Department oversight and governance, officer training, disaggregated data needs, and just the thought and the strategies to eliminate the disparities in equities all of our work. So that's pretty lofty, and I think Reva is the vice chair of our transportation committee is really an appropriate person, and I have interest in helping forming this soon. We'll bring this as a work group action back to the council, the future council meeting. But I really want to thank everybody for this work, because this is a chance that I think we've all been really patiently waiting to kind of start having this kind of analysis conversation. But important to note that no decisions are going to be made in a work group. Any kind of policies that will be made by the council and here with the full council. Left out of the conversation. The technology works. I think we can march ahead. So I just at that point want to welcome Chief. I know you have your own presentation, and thank you for all the homework you've done in helping put this together. It's not like we've waited a year just studying it. You've made some actual changes and some really important adjustments along the way. So it's really an opportunity for us now to really catch up. That, Chief, jump in.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's always a pleasure to see you, Mr. Chair, council members. Ed Frizzell from your Metro Transit Police Department. As we all know, if you open any newspaper or you watch any news broadcast over the last year, the subject matter that we're going to discuss today is usually the top of the agenda, specifically with use of force. And I want to thank you all very much, and specifically the council members that reached out asking the questions that I think everyone should be asking of why police do what they do. And there's nothing more important than when you have to go hands-on or go up the force continuum, specifically with another individual that has to be absolutely clear, articulable, and during a worst-case scenario, be presented to the world as we've witnessed after the tragic death of George Floyd. So I made this at a very high level, but the hope is that the conclusion of this, you'll have a firm understanding of some of the why, some of the framework and structure in which all police departments have to operate under, specifically how it's determined and the such. So with that being said, Greg, can we go ahead and start the slide presentation? Okay, next slide. So as we start to build the framework for this presentation, specifically, if you look at the agenda, it will go from the Transit Police Statutory Authority all the way down to the tools that we use during the course of any type of use of force execution of our powers during calls and such. Specifically, how staffing and diversity plays into the perception of police actions. As we talk about the deadly and non-deadly force statutes, which are framing laws in which we all have to adhere to. Understanding the reasonableness standard. You're going to be hearing about that in the coming days. And things such as what would a reasonable officer do in a situation like this? And most importantly, in this particular scenario, the duty to intercede. And we could all see that that has a very important look for everyone as we've witnessed events over the last year and a half. Then we'll look at handcuffing and restraints and why those are used, how they are used, and what initiates that particular use of force. Also, the control devices up into including tasers. Any question on the agenda before we begin? Okay, hearing none. Next slide. Okay, so specifically with our state statute 473-407, that came about nearly 25 years ago, in which we received the statutory authority to establish a Metro Transit Police Department. As you look at subdivision 1, you'll see that the council does have the authority to appoint police officers to carry out the functions specifically of a specialty police department to include investigations and to make arrests. And with the reduction of officers across the spectrum, particularly in the region, I'll point to one law enforcement agency that's down nearly 200 officers. We've had to exercise some general authority to assist other law enforcement agencies. We're at a point where individuals with the spike in crime are looking for a bandage to patch, and with our critical infrastructure located in some of the most dense areas of the region, we are that badge and that patch when individuals are looking for police assistance. It should be also noted that in subdivision 4, the regional administrator is the appointing authority for the peace officer, which is myself, commonly referred to as a CLEO, or Chief Law Enforcement Officer. And as you all know, I'm responsible for the management of MTPD, and under my post license and the establishment of my CLEO credentials, Chief Law Enforcement Officer, everyone's peace officer standardization and training license follows under mine, which simply means that my license is responsible for all 141 full-time officers and part-time officers when they're wearing our uniform. So with that, I have the ability to hire, discipline, and discharge of these police personnel based on actions and or non-adherence to policy and the such. So we are the only police department in the state that has the statute associated with us. And it's one of our, again, guiding frameworks on how do we do day-to-day operations. Any questions there? Okay, next slide. When you look at something such as diversity, and I know Met Council as well as Metro Transit has a sincere desire for equity and to make sure that our department reflects the communities and our riders that we serve. And I'm proud to say, as I briefed earlier, we have an outstanding diversity, and not to be shortchanged, we do have more to go, but we're at people of color over 35%. And that's in comparison to Metro Transit's outstanding job of 40% and our non-operators of 29%. With our officers of color, 62 of 131 of them are people of color and women. And it should be noted that there isn't another department in the state that reaches that diversity. And we are very quickly accelerating towards a position where we can say that we adequately or exceed the ability to say that we reflect the communities in which we serve. And those numbers have been verified, and they're only going higher. And along with that, we speak 16 different languages through the dense neighborhoods and different locales that our transit system rides in our critical infrastructure. So it's important when people see law enforcement officers that look like them, they could speak with them, they can understand them, and they're culturally sensitive and connected to the communities, make any time that things go dynamic with the use of force a little easier to understand, again, for those reasons. Any questions of me there? Okay, next slide. Now, when you look at our female officers, just as much, we lead the state in the number of females that we have representative on our department. So with our full-time officers, well over 20%. So 27 of the 131, with the total part-time officers, 21.8%. So again, very reflective of the communities in which we serve. And as we get further into this presentation, you will see why that's important again for those that come in contact with police, to have them reflect who they are, culturally sensitive, and they look like them. Next slide. With our calls for service, we all know that figure pre-pandemic of 270,000 people a day, 80+ million a year throughout 7+ counties and 85 communities. We are responsible to be guardians of our systems. And with that are our calls for service from the public, which number well over 23,000 to date. You can see the breakdown of what those look like specifically for our specialty police department. We are the last door open. And so a lot of times when we see those experiencing mental or physical stressors, if they're those seeking shelter or they're people in crisis, they generate a lot of our disorderly conducts, our prohibitive acts, all the way down to sleeping and medical, which officers are responsible for responding to. So those total calls for service between not only operators calls, transit staff, RCC, TCC, and the such, are well over 39,000 to date. And specifically, I want to point out the officer generated, which is our directed patrols. That means proactive activity by the officers to help mitigate crime in and around our transit system and our critical infrastructures. It also includes checks on our facilities, garage visits, and those across the board for a total, protective attitude of our assets and our people. So when you look at facility checks and mass checks being added during COVID, that was well over 1,300, and we were inching up weekly on the amount of compliance that we had gained with our mass checks. It should be noted that the TSA is still mandating masks on our system, so those mass checks will continue until such time they release us from that responsibility. One thing I'm very proud of, and we're the only ones that have them, and it's being emulated throughout the state, is our homeless action team. When you talk about contact with those seeking shelter, our Sabo encampment was growing and becoming the largest one in the state. But by actively and proactively engaging them through our homeless action team, we were able to successfully and succinctly help dismantle that camp, find services as well as housing for those individuals. And now that piece of our property over off of Hiawatha, it's very reassuring to see people biking through there, and they're having their lunch there and those types of things to show the effectiveness of what we can do with our diversity, our innovation, and our homeless action team, which has been nationally recognized as a model to how to deal with the homeless population. Any questions on that slide?
Mr. Chair, Chief, I would have one quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Chief, how do these calls for service compare to other large agencies, whether in the state, there's a handful, or other regions across the country, as far as like calls per capita or however we'd be measuring that? And clearly through the pandemic, the calls went up, but just trying to understand, based on our sworn numbers that we've got in service, how are we comparing as far as workload and the ability to manage everything that they've got coming at them?
Well, we routinely, through my peer advisory group, talk to all of the other transit agencies of like size, greater. And as you know, we're in the middle of the road on that, but we particularly have sistered with the BART department out in California, as that seems to be where we're going population-wise and calls for service. And we are right there with them. This is a national, and I say again, a national trend for calls for service, even during pandemic, where they didn't fall that much. Although our ridership went down, calls for service during the last 16 to 18 month period remained relatively the same. And that is held true from Dallas to Metro DC to as well as the Bay Area rapid transit. So we're right there. We are building our resource capacity daily, working very closely with the GM to make sure that we're, again, building that capacity as we go back to a fear generating service or a rush back to the workplace to be able to accommodate those. But I say that we have managed the current calls for service pre and post pandemic with the resources we have available, but we are on a very thin edge on as we expand the system, we're going to have to expand our abilities to service those areas.
Thanks, Chief. Appreciate it.
Next slide. So as we start to look at what we do as an MPD, we're very customer oriented. We've added customer service training to our traditional police training to make sure that we keep it focused on not only our diversity through our hiring, but caring for the vulnerable, ensuring health and safety for all on our transit systems. And we've avoided some of the more negative headlines that are noted throughout the bottom of the slide, with more positive headlines, not only for the council, but Metro Transit as well as the MTPD, such as, I'll point out, Metro Transit Police use Somali language lessons to break down barriers. The transit police work to help homeless during extreme weather. During the coronavirus, we were able to set the tone for police departments throughout the state on everything from temperature testing to maintaining our ability to keep our officers out on the system during those very trying times. We had a relatively very low number of officers that actually contracted COVID and were out of work. We developed plans and systems and staffing to make sure there was no cross-contamination, and we kept a very robust ability to, again, help keep the system safe and secure even during the pandemic type of activities. Next slide. So it's important as we start talking about use of force is what we don't do. The questions are out there across the board as why use of force is being applied, were the officers supposed to be there, what type of standard did they use to decide that they needed to use force. So as we go through the next few slides, we're going to show that some very prominent things about us being a specialty police department is we conduct very few traffic stops. Obviously, there are times and places where we may have to, just based on a totality of the circumstances, but we don't execute no-knock warrants. Canines are not used for apprehension, and we do not have holding cells. Some of the more high-profile headlines are located at the bottom of the slide that we've been able to avoid because that's not what MTPD does. So we're not held to that same standard in these very significant emotional events associated with the payouts, the accidental shootings, and the headlines that we see across the board. Any questions there? Okay, let's start diving into the policy development itself. Lexipol is our service of choice that is a nationally recognized service that compiles best practices and police policies consistent with police departments across the country. It offers policy revisions. It's adaptable. It notifies officers of policy changes. It requires and tracks employee acknowledgments, which is very, very key because you can make the policy or present the policy, but we want to also track that that officer got the policy, understands that policy, and are following those policies during the course of their duties during the course of the day. The entire police policy manual of note is posted on the MTPD's public-facing website for anyone to review, as it's not a secret document, and we're doing that out of transparency so folks can go and look. Some of the more larger overarching things is our chief's preface across the board. Our motto is now guardians of trust and accountability. That's what we do. We're out there for those folks that are utilizing our system, and most importantly, presenting an image of professionalism, empathy, and ethics that allow us to interact with these individuals on a daily basis to present that not only the perception of safety, but to actually demonstrate that. So with that being said, the policy manual together with the officers' training, professional discretion, provides the transit police officers with the tools they need to carry out their responsibilities. So as we go into the follow-on slides, I'll explain further. Next slide. The sources of our policy, as I just indicated, is Lexipol that sets that framework. Also, on a daily basis, my staff and I, we review the International Association of Chiefs of Police policies. The Police Executive Research Forum, which is the very dedicated think tank out of DC that helps balances best practices for way police departments are operating across the country and in some portions around the world. If you don't have those best practices in hand in your worst case scenario, that's the first thing the ensuing investigation will look for is why didn't you do this? Weren't you paying attention? Didn't you do what it showed to be the most effective in these type of circumstances? And that again is a daily practice where that information is pushed out. I personally read them every morning as a course to start my day and make sure that we are on top of the best and the brightest coming out of those type of organizations. Also, of course, the law and court precedents. Policy may be more restrictive than law, but not less. As an example, the law doesn't say that you cannot conduct a pursuit. However, based on my experience, understanding, again, best practices, if I, as the chief of police, said that we shouldn't be carrying out pursuits, then we should not. That's currently not the case, but we have it very restrictive on when those are conducted, why they're conducted, and for good reason. And when I say the law, that's going all the way from the Supreme Court rulings, which we'll discuss in some ensuing slides, to laws that are being generated under the 609 code at the state of Minnesota, as well as the multitude of ordinances throughout the 85 communities that we do have jurisdiction in. So that's a lot of information we have to take in, understand, and make sure it's applicable to the policies that we have operating today. Then also we look at other police agencies, as I mentioned earlier, our sister agencies with BART and DART and Metro out at DC, to make sure that if we're not an outlier, how can we best align with those best practices that they've proven are very effective, and we could easily integrate in the way we do our day-to-day business. So I'm happy to say that utilizing a lot of our 21st century policing policies and strategies that we've implemented over 2 years now, we have the ability to lead, and we get calls daily from these other agencies asking us, what are we doing and what can they do to best duplicate that in their agency? And I'll point specifically to things like HAT. Next slide. So when you look at how MTPD policy is formed based on those premises that were discussed in the last slide.
Chief Adele, Chair, I'm just curious, sorry to interrupt. I don't know that the slides are advancing. They aren't for me. Are they for others?
On my shared screen, they are.
Yep, they are for me.
They are for
Okay.
me.
Oh, it is now for me. Thank you.
Okay. So when we start looking at how these policies are actually formulated within the police department, utilizing those pillars that I just discussed. So as an example, if there's a change in law or there's a major event that's made national news, and we've all seen those, or new industry best practices on how to do these things, i.e. less than lethal or newer or new less intrusive type of takedowns, those things that are practiced and they're pushed down through either the post, which is Peace Officers Standardization and Training Board, our licensing agency, and what do we do with that? So we look at our policy analysts, our command staff, we look at our MTPD subject matter experts. They're all trained, certified. I myself is a BCA and Federal Bureau of Investigation subject matter, I won't say expert, but subject matter informative person that can speak to this. I've taught at Metro State as well as the Center for Criminal Justice and Law Enforcement for nearly the last 27 to 30 years. So we bring all these people into a room. We look at, again, the Lexapol, the change, the major event, new industry practices, and then we start our research. And we draft and revise if necessary, produce white papers, and discuss with the general manager on the why we're doing things. And he's been very receptive and supportive as we move forward. We've also bounced it off of the Office of General Counsel for their review to make sure that it's consistent with Met Council's policies, procedures, state law, ordinances, and the such. And then, and only then, after we get all that information, we revise it as necessary, exchange back and forth on the drafts as needed, and then the end were publication to all the staff. I've also briefed at every roll call to touch base with every single officer, and then going back to that acknowledgement by those officers that they received it, they understand it, they've been trained, signed off, it's been documented, then it's published out to the staff as an addition to our current policy manual. Any questions there? Okay, next slide. So when we look at the use of force, this is probably one of the more interesting slides I have here. We've already talked about the thousands of calls that service that we have on an average year. We look at our 2020 ridership, it's rebounding a little bit post-COVID, but at 35,000, that's pretty significant for our day-to-day activities 24/7. So in 2020, less than a percent of all police incidents resulted in force being used. I say again, only 0.8 of all police incidents resulted in force being used. And that's 536 instances of the 35,009. So I think that directly reflects the amount of training, adherence to policy, the understanding, and I always thank you and everyone that's on this call for our abilities to get our body-worn cameras up and running. We have thousands of hours of real-time video from those body-worn cameras, and I can tell you right now that it's diffused a multitude of complaints or the naysayers that have different versions of events. So it is proven to be exactly what it is, which is a force multiplier. And it, again, attributes to that 0.8% of force being used out of 35,000 calls. Any questions on that slide? Okay, let's go to the next slide. And when you start looking at the reasonableness standard, that's something that, again, you're going to start hearing quite a bit. What does a reasonable officer think without hindsight as they go about their day-to-day activities and or their decision to use force? Now, I've talked about earlier how a lot of these policies are based on laws and or Supreme Court rulings. And as an example, I'd refer you to the November 1984 Supreme Court ruling, Graham versus Connor. Officers are taught this on day one of use of force as they go through their training, so they understand what reasonableness means when they come into contact with one of our citizens in a police-related type of interaction. So just to give you a brief overview, Officer Connor was stopped by Mr. Graham after he became suspicious of Graham committing a crime. As it weighs out, that officer made some assumptions, not necessarily based on fact, when he came into contact with Mr. Graham. So during that encounter, Mr. Graham received multiple injuries through the use of force that was the result of that interaction with the officer. This made its way through the courts and made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, where Mr. Graham filed a lawsuit for excessive force, and it's become the standard of the way law enforcement develops a reasonable suspicion and probable cause and comes into contact with the citizen in the first place. That first question, why did you stop me? All comes back to this. And again, this goes to Police 101, first day in the academy. Next slide. So this was a majority decision that was delivered, and the takeaway here, and you will see this as a part of the state law and the governor's guidance that's was come out in the last few months. The Metro Transit Police Department's use of force policy directly reflects this, and I draw your attention to the bold print at the bottom left of the slide. The reasonableness of a particular use of force must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene, rather than with the 2020 vision of hindsight. That sets the tone that answers some of the Fourth Amendment guarantees against unreasonable search and seizures, and it has to be articulated, as we'll see in follow-on slides, documented, reviewed before that case moves forward. Otherwise, it becomes the legal term, poison fruit from the tree, which would throw out the whole case. So with that being said, next slide. It dictates specifically what Minnesota statute indicates in the 609 use of force codes. This isn't a Lexapol, this isn't a Metro Transit Police Department a type of statute. This is statute associated for all police officers in the state of Minnesota of what they can and cannot use force, and while they're doing that, or why they can use force. So they can use force while arresting a person, the execution of legal process, such as going through a warrant for someone's arrest, enforcing a court order. They have a misdemeanor or felony warrant, a gross misdemeanor warrant, and now if it's a bench warrant, we are obligated to take that person to jail just based on that. And it should be mentioned that routine stop involves our legitimate ability to run people's name and or ID to see if they have any such warrants, and while carrying out any other duty imposed by law. So that's a whole nother class in regards to the numerous number of laws and that we can utilize for a probable cause. But that non-deadly force is dictated by 609.06 of the state statute. Now, the one exception to that, and this is the hard part to always get the lay person to understand, none of that applies unless deadly force is the only option. Meaning, if I'm ready to die, I'm going to have to do what I can to save myself, my partners, or those individuals that need my help or are in close proximity. And believe it or not, those situations do indeed exist, but our officers understand they have a right to go home at night But as we get the regular slides, we'll talk about the justification and articulation of what needs to happen there. We do not use chokeholds. We talk about cartoid holds that may be utilized, but we do not use hogtie type of restraints because that too has second and third order effects physically on an individual, specifically one that's ingested a significant amount of drugs and can result in what's called excited delirium. And we've all heard of those people dying while in that position, but there's training associated with the proper way to do that. And you would ask yourself, why would that ever be done? Typically with a person in crisis, that they will literally kick out the back windows of the squad and do those types of things where they not only become a liability to their own self, but for officers in and around. And we do not transport someone face down again because of that. And it looks like Councilmember Engelbritson has a question.
Chair, is that okay?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. One of the things that I'm wondering is that I think at the beginning we've talked about also minors, and we haven't seen the data disaggregated to include them. As a agency who's agreed to transport children to school, and for an entire school district, but also for individual schools and other school districts, I'm thinking that it's really important for us to systematically always think about those and those children and our intentional practices with them as riders in our system. And so I scanned a little bit ahead in the slides, and it's just something for me that feels really missing. And I'm wondering if that is just very separate at this point, or if you can incorporate, when you talk about these things, we recognizing that 13-year-olds are on our buses and having exchanges with our officers as a part of their normal school day activity, and things that would have happened on a school bus are taking place on our systems, and instead of involving school staff are involving our officers. And so I'm just wondering about that piece, all of these slides that we've been talking about, and especially things like use of force, is that, are we to understand that these things also translate to how we engage those children in our system?
And that is a great question. Thank you for that, Councilman Engelbritson. Yes, everything that we do consider in one of the follow-on slides, we'll speak to the age of the individuals, and that goes to the other end of the spectrum on how they gauge the threat and how they view the officer that's speaking with them. Now, me, with my size, I may be viewed differently, and how I utilize force, again, must be articulated differently. We have officers that are literally 5'2", 120 pounds. And so their use of force frame of reference would be different. But as they go into this, and we'll discuss in the follow-on slides of how they build that frame of reference and have to come to the conclusion of how they utilize the use of force, be it for a juvenile, a violent person, or even the elderly. So as we go along, let's try to pick up on some of those points, and I'll point it out and see if I can direct some of that toward the juvenile interactions also. Is that acceptable?
Thanks, Chief. And I guess I hope as we go forward in this work that we can really institutionalize talking about this population, because it is a unique aspect of what we do. And just, Chief Fazell, I don't know when you had your growth spurt, but my son is 13, and a couple of his friends, in the last 2 years at 12 and even 11 shot up to 6 feet tall. And so that perception of risk goes both ways. And unfortunately for kids of color, especially those who are taller and bigger, even at 12 and 13 years old, get treated much differently and are at much more greater risk of being treated as adults, even though they are children. And I'm sure you know this deeply, but I think it's important for us to talk and recognize at the impacts of trauma when treated as an adult when you're a child. And so I appreciate you being willing to look and integrate that into your comments going forward. And I hope that we can institutionalize this lens when we're doing the work going forward as well. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, next slide. Okay, so when we look at that 609.066, that reasonable standard. So what would an objectively reasonable officer believe based on the totality of the circumstances? Again, if they're youth, if they're the violent felon, if they're obviously a person in crisis, or if they're more fragile or elderly, what is the totality there? And that interesting piece that's in the statute that says, without the benefit of hindsight, those officers need to make those decisions like on the spot. And we'll talk about force continuum here in the ensuing slides. But it's easy for me as chief even to watch the body worn cameras the next day and draw some conclusions, just in hindsight, versus that officer that's 3 o'clock in the morning, they're on our platforms, and they may find themselves by themselves with several individuals in crisis. That changes the whole scope of what they may or may not use. And I mentioned I've actually had one officer that had emergency CAT scan and MRIs attacked by two and severely beaten on a platform. But again, that's the risk we take. We know that, and so I don't second guess. But when we look at it from a legal perspective, is what would that reasonable officer see if they were in that circumstance and what their reactions would be? However, again, deadly force can only be used to protect a person or an officer from death or great bodily harm. And I think that's what's happening these days is the articulation of why they felt in danger to have to escalate the force necessary that could go sideways or degrade to a instance that no one wants to deal with. But so that threat must be expressed clearly, must be imminent, and what would happen if that officer did nothing? And we'll talk about the duty to intervene in later slides. Next slide. So when I talk about accurate reporting, this use of force reporting is absolute. I demand it. I demand that from our supervisors, that you just can't do something and walk away and just say whatever. And I was being a little casual with that, but it must be documented properly and accurately. That means if you had to use force, you immediately call in your supervisor. Supervisor will respond, document it appropriately, and then after the report is written, review said report to make sure that it's accurate and it clearly articulates why that use of force was used. And then if it results in anything outside of the board, we have internal mechanisms such as the Internal Affairs Unit, myself, my staff. We all look at these things and I make the decision if it needs to go forward from a PCF or personnel complaint form to an internal affairs investigation. And one of the first things we look at is the report, body worn cameras, and they must be in sync. Otherwise, we're going to be having some other discussions in regards to discipline up into including discharge. So we take this very, very seriously on how they document and articulate their reporting, specifically in the guise of use of force. And there is a box on there that indicates whether this was a juvenile. Without going too far in the weeds on that at this time, that's a completely different system. The juvenile justice system is separate from what you would see from the adult correctional system or judicial system. It has its own courts. They have their own holding facilities. They're directed in different ways, and they have a whole different statutory requirements for reporting that it can go everything from calling the parents to them going down to the juvenile detention center to whatever the crime level goes, but it is completely different and it is noted on the report and we must react appropriately. Any questions there?
Mr. Chair, I have a question about that.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Lindstrom.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Am I recalling correctly that you have a use of force board? Is that the right terminology?
Yes, it's the use of force continuum, and it's approximately 2 slides after this.
I'm talking about like when a use of force happens, then you have a review process, like you were just talking about, where it goes through and potentially goes through internal affairs, you review it. And I seem to recall or read someplace that that was called the use of force board. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I guess my overall question is, do other jurisdictions ever incorporate non-internal people to review use of force?
They do. And that's the civilian review board that you would see like out of Minneapolis. And they're all CRA or CRM or all the same, but that would be that third party reviewing of said use of force. But internally, we do have a use of force review board that if something falls outside of the realm of reasonableness, they do look at that. And again, that it goes down to review from body worn camera video to the report, to the supervisor's observations. And then it has a great impact on whether it moves on to an internal affairs investigation. But yes, there are municipalities out there that have civilian review boards with a varying degree of success. I haven't seen one yet that actually has the power to discipline and or do any follow-on post that. So I think those are things that they've been trying to work through since I've been in police work.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide. So the one thing of note is that a majority of those calls, particularly on a transit system, based on some of our population that's on there, are medical calls. Many of our officers are first responders. We have EMTs in the such as side certifications, and a great portion of the calls we go to is because we're everywhere. We're usually the first on the scene, many times before EMTs arrive. So we train our officers, equip our officers from everything from Narcan to the ability to deliver babies. Done that. So when you get there, we again start all the triage before MT gets there. Most recently, when 13 people were shot less than 200 yards from the 5th and Hennepin platform, our officers were first on scene to apply tourniquets, pressure, and resulting in, I would say, saving those lives, as they'd already had 3 DOA or dead on arrival at that time. But this is something that we do almost every hour across the system, is assist with those medicals. The officers have the ability to not only evaluate what's going on, but they again have the tools. We have squad med boxes and all the squads, and it gives them the ability to react in that capacity to a great portion of our number of calls. Next slide. So when you start talking about the use of force continuum, that's when an officer has that time frame after the initiation of contact with an individual, either through a police call, direct observation, or proactive activity. You got 2 lanes to go there. You can either de-escalate or escalate. It should be mentioned that our training focuses heavily on de-escalate and evaluation through our crisis intervention team training. The use of less lethal is a middle option. But again, to talk it out and use their training and ability to use what's commonly referred to as verbal judo to not let that particular situation escalate to a point that force is necessary. However, as we'll look at during the actual force continuum brief, it can escalate very quickly from good morning, ma'am, can I help you, to put the knife down. And that could be a matter of seconds where it obviously escalates. You can articulate as a part of your probable cause for that use of force is that the individual had veins protruding from their neck. They were speaking rapidly. Bits of spit were emanating from their mouth. Their eyes were squinted, and veins were protruding from their forehead. That is a very clear indication that with clenched fist, taking a defensive fighting stance, that this thing is going to escalate very quickly, and decisions that need to be made as to however to de-escalate, defend yourself, and or take that individual into custody. So next slide, and I'll get a little more in depth. So When you talk about officers are trained in when to use of force, it's not a just a totally objective or subjective type of thing. This is trained in the police academy as well as in service, and it's a part of the peace officer standardization and training requirements of full understanding. Now, to that far left, that first portion of the force continuum is presence. That's when the officer shows up, they have a badge, they have the car, and people know that they're an officer. So there is a certain expectation of what happens there. That is empty hand tactics, verbal commands. Hey, I need to speak with you. Can you please come over here? Those types of things. And that's the optimum for me where officers' contact should be done during any of those types of things. However, it can go very quickly up based on those subject actions and levels of resistance till we get to that point where it's aggravated active aggression. It's very succinct when you go passive aggressive with individuals. Again, they're clenching their fists. You have to speak louder. You may go to what's called an escort hold, where we're trained on joint manipulation, which is not breaking the arms of those things, but gives us the ability to quickly control that suspect, take them to the ground, and cuff them as necessary. Again, trained defensive tactics are something you have to do yearly during defensive tactics, as well as your overall post-licensing requirements. When you talk about defensive resistance, and now they're starting to swing at you, they're charging you, and it should be mentioned at this point that every call is a gun call because you're bringing the gun. And when individuals are highly agitated and they're in this close proximity fight and they go for your gun, that changes the entire complexity of that particular call, particularly when they get that. FBI statistics show if you're disarmed by a suspect, there's a 90% chance that you will be killed with your own weapon. And that's nationwide. We've had 3 officers across the nation in the last week have that occurred to them. So that's why your subject actions will dictate how quickly that can go. Now, without going through each and every one of those, and I can supply this to you at if you like, where you can see those actions drive the way the officers will interact with that particular individual. Now, of note, you can go from the first level of escalation all the way up to deadly force, which is the bright red portion to the right, in a second. That scenario of can I help you, or I need to come in, the 911 call has been placed, there's a gun suddenly pointed at you, the individual bails out of a vehicle and you can clearly see the handgun in their waistband, and then they turn around and point it at you and pull the trigger. Okay, that happened in a microsecond from presence all the way up to where deadly force is going to become necessary. And that articulation should be clearly spelled out in your report as to how you got from step 1 to deadly force. And body-worn cameras will substantiate that and or show that that is not how that took place. And so far, that's working firmly in law enforcement's favor. Any questions in regards to the force continuum?
I have one.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question, and this goes back to a case with Philando Castile, who it was told was telling the officer that he had a licensed permit to carry a gun, and then I think he was instructed to go to get it. Has there been any changes in policy on how to handle a situation? Because if a person is going to get their gun, that probably moves them from active resistance, up the chain really quickly. Have the practices changed for a situation like that so that it could be handled better for de-escalation? For example, the person says they have a gun, the officer tells them, I don't know, put your hands on your head and keep them there until the gun is, secured by the officer. Has there been any discussion about things like that?
Absolutely, and Council Member, thank you for that question. Point of record is today is the 5th anniversary of the death of Mr. Castile, and without being judge and jury of that officer, I will speak to where those actions I observed them. and how it affects against this. And this is the way we train. A, that officers should not have been flush on that door, which means exposing all of their critical body parts to a door. We're not taking a bladed stance behind the driver or the passenger when asking for ID. We have individuals all the time, specifically in this day and age, where actually the number one auto theft crimes out there are people that leave their guns in the car, specifically those that come from outlying areas and they come in town for sporting events. Those weapons are being stolen out of their guns. I mean, out of their glove compartments that they leave in the car. And so when you approach and an individual says they have a weapon, of course, you need to show a higher ability of awareness of movement and the such. But what transpired in that particular instance, particularly with the child in the back seat, that goes to common sense. When I see a minor child in the back, the individual's already told me they had a gun. I have a position of safety where even if that individual was going to try to shoot me from the inside of that door, they'd have a hard time getting to me without me being able to take the corrective action once seeing that gun. And none of those things happen to my point of view. So we train our officers on the proper way to make traffic stops. We train our officers on the proper identification and asking for their permit to hold. The one thing that changes a lot of that dialogue is if the individual is clearly under some type of substance or they're intoxicated. State statute says even if you have a permit to carry, you cannot drink. So if you could observe that behavior prior to that individual saying that they're carrying and be able to articulate it later, then those actions taken would be based on the fact that I'm going to cuff you. I'm going to tell you to put you in a position where you won't reach that gun until I recover it for safekeeping at that point. And then that individual could be cited and or arrested for having that weapon under the influence. So those are things we teach. It's all goes to our officer safety, and it's being applied throughout this department to the best of my observation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next slide. And I'll try to speed through here a little bit. So the important part of duty to intercede, and again to Councilmember Chambliss's concerns, you can't watch something that is not right continue to take place. And I'm very passionate about this. I've experienced it over my time, and I've interceded in ways that I won't discuss here. However, if you do have that duty, your duty of professionalism, it doesn't have to be trained to know the difference between right and wrong. And if you need to take those steps to make sure that you can prevent the possible death and or injury to someone based on an officer's non-trained activities, even their vocal, stepping in and say, hey, you need to step back, go to the car, I'll take you the rest of the call. Put your gun away. That's not necessary at this point. No, you're not doing that. This individual's a juvenile and it's a 11-year-old female or something along those lines that you can't articulate to me that this is going to be a threat for you. That's what officers step in and they intercede. And it goes to character-based hiring and training. And that's what we do here at MTPD. I don't ask you in interviews, I did a lot of them last week, what's going to make you a good cop? How fast can you drive? How many people can you engage in a fight at the same time? We don't ask those questions here. I ask them, when was the last time they did something good for someone else other than themselves? I ask them as the last question, what can you tell me about yourself that's not in your resume or this application? And the number of character-based questions that we got out of that give me a clear indication of who we need to be hiring and why. Because those are the people, when I'm not watching or a supervisor's not watching, they're going to intercede because it's the right thing to do. And when that does occur, our policy requires this report to be made in writing to me within 24 hours. And I can tell you from my passion, that better be happening, because those days of, you can refine it as thin blue line or blue wall or whatever you want to call it, that's not taking place under my watch here on MTPD, and they know the difference between right and wrong. And I'll tell you this, we've won every arbitration up into including veterans preference hearings on all our terminations thus far. That's how serious I am about this. So I didn't mean to go into that so deeply, but I wanted the council to understand exactly how we do business over here. Next slide. So I'll be wrapping up here, Chair. When we just look at, when you talk about handcuffing or restraints, the only restraints that we use over here, obviously handcuffs for obvious reasons. We do use leg restraints if they're kicking and trying to break out windows and those types of things. And spit guards are probably something we use the second most. Post a lot of the concerns for contamination and that individuals clearly like to talk about what they would like to do, and they do that in the form of saliva. So once we start getting that happen, we quickly utilize the spit guards, and that simply prevents them from spitting at others. And then to our earlier questions, our considerations again are age, health, disability, and what we're seeing there that would necessitate. There should be many reasons that you would handcuff a 78-year-old woman, but a 78-year-old woman killed one of my partners and precinct mates when she wasn't cuffed. So I share that with you briefly to show that how quickly those circumstances change and how dynamic it can get. So with that said, next slide. The overall definitions, our baton, wooden expandable, OC spray, that what mace is ground cajun pepper with a propellant. So when you hear that someone got maced, that's the effectiveness of this. The chemical irritants are what you saw during the civil unrest and was fired. Less lethal impact rounds, again, that don't result in serious injury and or death. And our safeguards are verbal warnings. We're considering distance, officers, subjects, and we avoid head, neck, throat, spine, heart, kidneys, and groin. Because obviously, if struck in those areas, that could cause significant injury and should be avoided. Next slide. So here's our authorizations to carry. Big question on tasers, specifically during current events. Those things are lightweight, yellow, and carried on your weak side of your body that requires a cross draw. And you should be able to quickly, by a reasonable officer, yeah, I said it, be able to realize exactly what's going on when you have your taser on. It's very clear. Everyone on the MTPD is certified. They've gone through the training, and we carry that on the weak side with that bright yellow color, and they're recertified every 2 years, including myself, to try to minimize the possibilities of anything like that happening. And going from warnings all the way down to reporting and data downloading, as that's the type of capability our tasers will do, to record the action and validate what the officer said in their report and actually did. Next slide. Okay, that concludes that, and I realize I rushed through that. That is literally a 1 to 2 semester class that everybody has to go through, including a lot of our in-service that, again, including myself, have to go through on a yearly basis. I look forward to the working groups where we can really get down to the granular level on how these policies are discerned, how we apply them with our specialty department, and to make sure that each and every one of you have a clear understanding of what we're doing over here as police officers under the Met Council's flag, and how we are going to proceed forward with the rest of the group. So with that being said, any questions of me?
Any more questions for Chief at this point? Go ahead, Phil.
Yes, thank you, Chief, for your presentation. And my question, and if we need to yield, is not kind of related to your presentation, but just another issue. I'm getting some people in my district, especially like older people and some students that are not concerned about the safety on the transit, taken transit. And I'm just wondering, what are we doing about visibility or that type of thing? Are you seeing differences there, but they're not ready to go back or feel like they're comfortable using transit right now? And I think that's kind of an issue with some people as well.
Well, thank you, Council Member, for the question. And you're right. We all watch the news, and we see the various stories that they're pushing out there. But we've been working very closely with the entire transit team under the general manager's direction to work on the perception of safety, because in many instances, that perception could be just as real of what they're seeing. So we're taking a different approach, I will say a modified approach on adding an additional presence specifically on our light rail systems to include our community service officers. I'm getting back up to full authorized strength at this point. I've modified their duties where they will be paired up with police officers to give us a little expandability throughout the system, get us more out there in a visible presence. And that's happening as we speak. And then I'm sure in the coming days or week, you'll hear more about how we're putting that official uniform presence throughout the system to, again, not only help through with that perception, but give us the ability to make people feel safe as they come back to the workplace utilizing our transit assets. You will also see that we have canine teams. And before anyone gets the wrong image, as you walk through there, that will be my floppy-eared, highly trained counterterrorism explosive labs that were with their team members that actually took more pictures of children the other day with those. But you'll see those teams on all our critical infrastructure spanning from the Mall of America up to BCTC. You'll see them downtown, again, to give that official presence in and around our critical infrastructure and on along our routes. So those are just two things in conjunction with our real-time information center that we're also bolstering in staff. And what that is I have seasoned officers watching or have the ability to watch all 3,200 of our cameras throughout the system. And with their ability to see things develop before they turn into crimes, to help direct officers there, to help mitigate crime, develop probable cause, which has another a piece where now we're approaching the individual that we have on high def video conducting those activities on our systems that are either goes to code of conduct or illegal. And we go directly to that person and we have the video evidence to support that. That's been outstanding. The number of crimes that we've intercepted, the crime we've mitigated, and the known suspects that we've generated and got out to a roll call and apprehended within less than 24 hours has been stupendous. And then I will also say we have a Hitachi system that now gives Metro Transit Police Squad, the officers in those squads, the ability to see inside of all of our LRTs. We didn't have that capability to recently, where now, before I even get to the call, I can pull up a camera on the LRT train in question and be able to, again, use that for my probable cause, go right where we need to do, or direct more officers there to mitigate or stop that particular activity. So that's a 30-second elevator speech on what we're doing, but that information will be coming out in a more succinct manner in the coming days and weeks.
Great. Well, thank
Yeah,
you, Chief,
important
for your
question.
input. So, thank you.
Councilmember Lee had a question. All right.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chief, for a great presentation. My question is, as you said, hindsight is 2020, and this was really high level. But my question is about our personnel policies. And looking at the George Floyd case, Officer Chauvin had in 20 years 19 complaints against him, 2 of which ended up being in a formal reprimand on his files. And add on to the outrageousness that he was a police trainer. He took rookies under his wing, and so you have that situation occur, and that is an interesting level of liability that Minneapolis police was able to let happen. And so I was wondering if for our department, what are we doing about ensuring that our personnel policies weed out folks like that so that we don't have a Derek Chauvin working our beat?
Well, thank you very much for that question. As you know, that is on the cutting edge of what initiated even this conversation on use of force. In a former life, I was an internal affairs investigator as well as the commander of a police academy in that jurisdiction. And I can tell you the frustrations that I had in that regard. So upon elevating and you guys giving me the honor to serve as your police chief, the first thing I looked at was the internal affairs complaints. And there was 157 at the time on day one. So we had to do a line-by-line review that did result in some terminations. It resulted in some demotions. And every one of those that went to an arbitration and or the veterans preference hearing, anyone that knows those systems, it's a 50-50 split as to whether you win that or not, especially with union pressures and the different takes on what needs to happen with that particular officer. But based on our 21st century policing models, of we're looking for integrity, character, training, implicit bias, and procedural justice. In the time that I've been here, those 157 internal affairs complaints have gone down to 1. And so the message is out there, and individuals know that if they don't conform to the right things with the policies and procedures at hand and with my 21st century policing expectations, then they won't be working here. And I've had 3 individuals leave in the last month that couldn't conform. Now, they did it on their own, but I hate to say that we're a lot better off with the type of influences that they were having. The average age of our officers right now are approximately 25 years old. You hear a lot of, it feels like a high school locker room sometimes, but they're very young and impressionable. They're that new generation. And I want to make sure that we set the tone for those individuals to go forward and be the cornerstones of the type of police department we all want. So with that being said, I also instituted a new field training officer program where we scrapped the old program. We made everybody reapply. We put them through a 40-hour training course before they can even say they're a field training officer, because that's the first contact that new officers is going to have. And again, they're firm believers of what we're saying. They have an understanding of our expectations. They're the best and the brightest, diverse, and they're out there training the folks hopefully for a better tomorrow. So I hope that answered your question.
Yep, thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Johnson, followed by Councilmember Wolf, have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief, I'm going to ask a question that is, it's a related topic, but not necessarily something under your jurisdiction, but I just want to know, how, the people that are evading, the fares, we don't have a strict system that keeps people off of our LRT. If they don't pay fares, it's kind of an honor system. And of course, we've lobbied for ambassadors in a different way to police that, so to speak, or enforce that or address that. We're not there yet. But my question to you is, because our trains go through jurisdictions, right? And yet our jurisdiction, kind of permeates. So, there are people that are looking to do no good all over the place. And, I think there's always the path of least resistance, and where they can find easy targets or places where they can take refuge if they are, trying to get out of somewhere. So my question is just simply this, and I've talked with staff too about, what would it take to, change our systems so that we'd have more of I don't know the technical word, but a closed system where you'd have to show or prove, your fare to be able to get on the train. I don't want to make an assumption. Because you're the expert in public safety, but is that a factor that's playing into, our numbers that are showing up on trains that are out to do no good? And I'm not talking about people that are in need, good people that are, struggling. That's not who I'm talking about. In fact, they become targets, by the people that are up to no good. So, and it's great that we have the HAT team, right? So, I'm just trying to figure out, what solutions, and there's a cost benefit analysis that has to go with everything we do. But, my impression is, and I hear from my constituents too, they're concerned about safety. My impression, and maybe what I'm hearing, is that, because of that fact, that may contribute to people being able to just jump on the trains and move about and do things that, our officers then have to respond to.
Yes, and again, thank you for that question, because that is why we are guardians, because predators are out there and they're in all jurisdictions. They look a lot of different ways, they dress differently, but they have one commonality, which is they are predators. They're looking to take advantage of those that are vulnerable, to take advantage of those that they think would be an easy mark. And by being able to identify those individuals early, we hope to mitigate that. And that first step was when we put our real-time information center cameras so we can look for the predators, people that know what to look for. They see the individuals skunking in and around the platforms or around different areas where they're not supposed to be. And we dispatch officers to try to intercept that behavior. Then we have our transit response unit, which is our plainclothes. They're out there. They're taking on decoy roles to try to also draw in those predators to apprehend them in the act. And then that's a well orchestrated type of way of doing that when we have that resource out there. And then third is having that official presence out there. I've talked to Bart, who said that, and they have ambassadors and have like 3 different levels of those civilians that are walking around their sites, and they report that the actual fare evasion goes down because from what I've seen from personal experience, individuals usually look on the train to see if there's anyone there first that could actively stop and or check, and then that's where they ride. And as soon as an officer gets on or official presence, they just jump off and jump on the next one. And some of them are very skilled at it. I spent Christmas and New Year's and a few days during the spring observing the behavior, and it's pretty succinct. And this is the piece that I didn't see coming. A lot of the social organizations out there do have vouchers for individuals that can't make the actual shelters for times or capacity, and they end up on our system. That's again where the HAT team comes in to try to get additional referrals to again get them off the last door open, which is our vehicles at night. So when we checked one individual that was taking up 3 seats with themselves and their property, and they were informed that you cannot do that, they produced the fare for themselves and their 2 bags. And so, I mean, that's some of the things that you see out there and the workarounds that people come up with. But we recognize that fare evasion is an issue. We're trying to address that through some of the means that I've talked about, but it's a persistent problem, and we'll keep trying to grow to, again, try to mitigate that as an issue.
Mr. Chair, I'd like just a follow-up, please. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that answer. And again, it's really up to the council on how we address fare evasion, and we've got an approach that we're seeking to administer should we get legislative authority to do so. I just really want to mention this and bring it up to the council because, you know, there's a cost in changing the way we take fares and add security to those trains that we aren't doing now. And I understand the system we have is not unique, but you know, it's a system that I think attracts people that are up to no good because it's an easy place for them to jump on board. So then we're investing in cameras, and we're investing in more police, and we're investing in soon-to-be ambassadors. Where, you know, there's a lot of investments that go in, and I'm just very curious if somebody can really take a look, you know, at a cost-benefit analysis. I think I spoke with Judd a little bit about this, maybe with Wes too, but you know, at the end of the day, you know, if people aren't riding the trains because they're afraid to be on them, and if people are targets because they're vulnerable, because we can't, you know, do our, you know, best with physical restraints or systems to keep people off the trains, you know, we're investing in a lot in our PD that are out there, and I know our train operators are concerned about it, and so, you know, I just can't go through this process without saying I am, you know, concerned with the way our fare system works now. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see what the Citizens League comes up with, but, you know, I've been in public service maybe way too long, but after 9/11, everything changed about the physical environment and how people approach important buildings and places and transportation and you name it. And I am approaching this, you know, in that same mindset, like, well, gee whiz, you know, people are just hopping on, causing trouble. I guess, you know, maybe that would be one thing we should look at Met Council. And when I bring it up, I'm like, oh, it's so expensive to retrofit. And yeah, I get it, but all of this is expensive. And the public is suffering right now. The good people that are just trying to get from here to there are suffering right now. So I'm going to be on this for a little while and see if, you know, we can do some work around, you know, changing the physical structure, environment, ways that people are entering and exiting our trains. Because you don't get to just hop on an airplane, you know, run on and run off, you know, and what's the difference? You're in a container with a bunch of people, you know, and they've got weapons. And so I'm, you know, where I'm at, everybody. And big things need to change. Because right now I'm very concerned about a lot of what's going on out there, and also how we, and Chief, this is why you're just so great in this role, but interjurisdictionally, how, these people are moving between jurisdictions and you guys know who they are. And you're all working to, really target and find the people that aren't doing well in our community as far as their deeds. So I'll leave it at that, but I feel very passionate about it. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Councilmember Johnson. And we're going to hear a question from Councilmember Wolf and then Atlas Ingebrigtsen. So go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you, Chief, for telling us about the thought process that goes on as our officers are arresting somebody. It seems like it's an inherently risky business for both the person being arrested and for the cop. There's risk of injury to both parties, but we're a little unique compared to other agencies in that we don't control what happens afterwards. If you're a city, you have a city attorney, or you have the county attorney for more serious things, but the Met Council doesn't decide what gets prosecuted and what doesn't. So could you tell us a little bit about what happens after the arrest?
Yes, and I could try to do this in 30 seconds or less, but thank you very much for a very astute question, because we're just one leg of the stool of the justice system. We're the law enforcement end. Obviously, we've come with the initial probable cause, and that moves directly to then the judicial phase. So that county attorneys, they handle the gross misdemeanors, the felonies, those are more serious, whereas the city attorney handles the misdemeanors. And I can tell you right now from our misdemeanor fare evasion, that's almost nil and what actually gets moved forward within that system. It doesn't take individuals long to learn that if there's I'll use the word glitch in the system at the judicial level, but I can see it and the officers see it. It is a lot of recidivists that are out there that you look at their criminal records 15, 20 times. Recently coming back to the system, yeah, I'm the chief and I know a lot of folks by their first name and date of birth now, just by the sheer number of times that they've come through the system. So there's something there that they need to seriously look at. It got even worse with COVID because they weren't taking misdemeanor and many gross misdemeanors in the jail to maintain that social distancing. The county attorney, if they really need to start following through with some detention and or a longer standing penalties for those levels of crime. As an example, Mr. Smiley went forward and conducted $156,000 of damage on one of our light rails by putting bricks into a pillowcase and swinging them randomly around side of the car, breaking windows. He was out in a matter of 5 hours, coming back and fighting with officers again on the platforms, conducting the same type of activity. And the only way we were able to get him off the system and the third of calls in a day that we were getting from him alone is we got his son involved through the HAT team to take responsibility for him and get him committed. So we had relative calm on that system through St. Paul just because he had been committed at that time. So in short, yes, you have that first piece of law enforcement, the second piece, which is the judicial system, and the third leg, which is the correctional system of actually holding these individuals. And if you're a juvenile, I've seen juveniles accused of attempted murder, guns, the whole 9 yards out in 3 hours because they don't want to house them in the juvenile detention center for various reasons or vicarious liability. And sometimes they beat the officers back down to the Fifth Street platform before they finish their reports. Now, those are the realities. There's a big picture, and hopefully we can find a way to close the gap on those things.
Thanks, Chief. Linnea?
Thanks, Chair. Chief, thanks for the presentation. I think one thing I want to remind ourselves about is that we heard this in previous presentations, and we heard it even yet today, that when we look at the instances of calls coming in, we are not different than other agencies of our size, and the amount is, Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it said 0.8% on the slide that we had. I do believe that there are some growing pains for communities like ours that are growing from small metropolitan areas and areas where people frankly just didn't take public transit into a larger metropolitan area where more people who previously did not take transit are thinking about it, are going to have transit more closely located in their communities. I think it's really important that we hear what the chief shared about the perception and the work of the council around the perception of safety versus a real versus risk. And we have to deal with the perceptions of people, but I think it's important to not um, have fear and promote a spirit of fear around our system, and to also help our citizens who might call. And I've had, you know, mayors of my community say this is what they're battling. They know what the reality is. It's the perception that they're battling, and that perception is being leveraged by people who have other political views around public transportation and about density. And I don't think we should be naive to how that is being leveraged by those audiences to promote that our system is unsafe. And that's not to say we don't have opportunities for improvement or opportunities to do more. But when I was working for the city of Minneapolis in 2008 and Southwest LRT line was being chosen, the types of things that was being talked about then are the same things we're hearing now. And it had a lot to do with, frankly, race and income diversity. And that people believed they would have access. And believe it or not, when we started putting in bike trails, in bike routes into people's communities, we heard the same kinds of things. You're gonna open my community up to theft and to unsavory characters. I also hope we really think about, is our, you know, system the system to leverage to get people to not participate in activities that are not helpful for themselves or for us. And remember that people are doing things because they're in a tough spot. We've never had a greater level of income inequality than what we are facing right now. Due to the pandemic, many people lost jobs and are in recovery from that, and are dealing with generational trauma as a result of many different things. And Chief just shared a story about someone who clearly was in a mental health crisis, and how, because of the innovative work of the team, was able to get the right kind of care, which wasn't a jail room, it was something else. So I just hope we keep that in mind. People are going to struggle with what we are doing for lots of different reasons, and we have to make sure we keep that struggle in the correct perception for ourselves and in the correct hierarchy, and partner in doing things in innovative and smart ways to make sure we're increasing equity in our system, so we have less people who find themselves in a position where they're experiencing extreme trauma and then reacting out either due to mental illness issues as a result, or inability to find income on the legal market, and are forced to find other ways to getting income that put them in a place of a life that puts them in the illegal market for work. So those are just things that aren't new to the conversation of transportation and mass transit, and are not without greater political ideology behind them. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for making that point. I know we've gone over just a little bit, but this is such an important topic. And as I mentioned at the beginning, which you may or may not have heard with my sketchy microphones, but this is the beginning, not the comprehensive end. And I really also want to thank Riva Chambliss for chairing what will be a small work study group to help guide this comprehensive review over a number of committee of the whole meetings. So this, what you've heard tonight, may prompt some additional questions, some additional thoughts, and if there is interest from anybody to being on this group, please let me know. Having said that, is there any kind of last burning question that you'd like? Chief, thank you. That was a lot of material, and it really is really important for us to kind of absorb that. And you've explained it artfully, and I know you're here joined by many of your team, who we also admire, and because we know this is a whole group working on this. I want to thank all council members. This is something we've been talking about, thinking about. We certainly read about it in the general public. We are in a unique spot, and I think many people have made this point that we're not a locality, we're not an independent local government. We don't actually pass laws, but yet we have a very much important role in our transit systems. And it is not just the reality, it is the perception. So we have to kind of think about the communication as well as the messages that we send with our policies. So I know that we all live big lives, so thank you for spending this time. And Molly, thank you for stepping in and saving my bad computer. And I look forward to seeing you all soon. And I think this meeting is adjourned, but we will continue the conversation soon. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Good
everyone.
night.
Bye, everyone.